I'm Paul Deloria for the Maui Community Investigation, an organization of local Maui residents that were very concerned about what happened on August 8th in Lahaina. The fire was devastating, and early on we started to gather a lot of data and information and also conduct a lot of different interviews. We have a hub of information at the MauiCommunityInvestigation.com. And I'm joined here with my partner and co-worker in all of this, Bruce Douglas. So Bruce, welcome.
Good to be a part of this with you. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, and let's begin. Let's go into our first report, and we'll have many that will follow as we go along. To gather more information about what we're doing, you can go to MauiCommunityInvestigation.com. But let's go into our topics that we'll be having for today. We're going to start with the pre-fire conditions. And also, Bruce will be talking about the wind generation that occurred on August 7th. And then I'll be going into the numerous fires that occurred on August 8th. There were as many as 46 different incidents reported on that day. And we'll go into the specific fire that started at 2:55 p.m. in Lahaina. And look at the many infrastructure failures that occurred. That certainly added to the death toll. And look at the fire escape and the scope of destruction, which was incredible. And then we'll go into a lot of the anomalies. We'll go into 8 anomalies that were very unusual. And also we'll talk about the human toll and also the proposed causes of the fire. So let's start by looking at preconditions. In Lahaina, there has been a high grass that surrounds that area, a lot of brush. During the winter, there was a lot of rain, and then we had drought. And as a result, we had a lot of brush surrounding the area. And this is not an uncommon occurrence. This has happened many times before in the past with this brush. And if you look at it, we have the owners of the properties are supposed to be involved with actually cutting down the brush, and they have been negligent. And if you look here, the state of Hawaii has many different properties, all the light green here. For example, what we're doing right now, our team is updating these tax maps so that we can get a better depiction of those who own the land so that we can contact them to cut grass. Now, on August 7th, there was a lot of different types of things that also occurred that were very strange, like many of these wind tornadoes that we're looking at over the ocean. And also on that day, there was this white haze, this white type of ash that was leaving its deposits throughout the area on different surfaces. So again, another very strange anomaly that occurred right before the fire struck. And so next, Bruce will be going into the actual weather conditions that we had, the wind, and questions to look at.
The big windstorm of the Lahaina fire was one of the main issues of the fire that propelled it. And a lot of people want to understand, was this wind engineered or was it natural? I'm going to present you information and let you decide. Now, this is a high resolution image that happens twice a day in the AM and the PM over the entire planet. And this is the Hawaiian Island portion of it. And you can see on August 5th in the morning, we have normal wind patterns. In the afternoon of the 5th, normal wind patterns. The 6th, normal wind patterns in the morning and afternoon. But something happens on the 7th. The clouds start lining up in straight lines coming at us in the morning of the 7th. And it's interesting, these lines of clouds don't go past the Hawaiian Islands. They stop at the Hawaiian Islands. Both are very unusual. By the afternoon, we were having a very strong wind across the island. You can see there were perfect lines of clouds, very unusual. They would be lined up in harmonic patterns like this, and for some reason only go as far as the Hawaiian Islands and then stop and not go past us. 2 very peculiar anomalies. And I've been looking at weather for 15 years and saving screenshots of hurricanes and video loops, and I have not seen anything like this before. This is the afternoon and morning of the 8th. You can still see the lines of clouds, only the sun angle is a little different, so we don't see it quite as pronounced. And here on the actual evening of the 8th, when we had the big windstorm that propelled the fires, again, the clouds were in perfect lines lining up against us. And for some reason, the Maui was blacked out on this particular image. Now, there is a line that sometimes appears across images. Was it random or intentional that was blacked out? It always makes us wonder. But then we see the next day, it goes back to normal wind patterns again on the 9th in the morning and the afternoon. So let's go back to the morning of the 7th with the winds lined up, in a perfect harmonic pattern. You're going to see that again because I'm going to show you some infrared video loops in a moment to really show you what that is. But, it's a very interesting, these lines. And I made a note because the same day on the 7th in the afternoon, there was a strange white haze over the whole island. And we all wondered, what is that haze? Where did that come from? I haven't seen a white haze as I drove across from Haiku to Kahului. It was very pronounced across the isthmus. And we made a mental note, okay, like we have strong winds, clouds coming at us in straight lines, and a funny haze. What's going on? What is this? And again, here's the afternoon of the 8th where they're lined up perfectly. Now, I'm going to bring this up in a minute, so I'm going to talk about cymatics and geometric patterns. Cymatics is a way where you take a plate and put it above a speaker, and you run frequencies on the metal plate with sand on top of it. And as you play different notes, like the person on this piano is playing different notes, you see each harmonic frequency will make it line up. But you can also do the same thing with a loudspeaker and a petri dish filled with water. And on water, if you do various harmonic sounds at certain frequencies, you'll get these interesting patterns, kind of like what sometimes we see in the sky. So I'm going to come back to this in a moment. But this is the infrared satellite loops. It's a colorized, so it's artificially colorized to enhance the more extreme conditions. But this is the hurricane Dora moving across, and you see it forming right there off the coast of Mexico at about 10 degrees latitude, which is where hurricanes naturally form. And you see it start to spin up into a very tight pattern. I don't see any aerosols or anything else associated. It looks like a natural hurricane to me, and it's got a nice tight pattern to it. And you see around it, winds and everything are calm around it. You see a nice cloud bank to the north of it, the solid cloud bank, that's not doing anything funny. But what's interesting about this is as Hurricane Dora approached Hawaii at 10 degrees latitude, passing about 500 miles to the south, this interesting phenomena of this speckly type of vibration across the clouds up in this area to the north up here and all in this area here. And you're going to see this where the clouds break up and they start forming, and you almost like there's a glistening happening. You can see a point up here where it seems like something is causing the frequency. This when the main part of the hurricane happened, storm happened here. And then the next day it goes back to normal patterns again. And then the hurricane goes on its merry way. Now, these are little video loops about 10 hours each, so they have to string together to make a complete picture, which is what the jumpiness is. So let's look at this again, this strange anomaly to the north, a little more close up. And you can see this interesting pattern. And again, almost looks like that cymatics, like someone's taking something with a frequency generator and creating a vibration in order to make wave after wave of cloud hit us. And in all the 15 years of saving screenshots and looking at hurricanes, I have not seen this before. So this is a new phenomena that I've not noticed. So let's go up even closer, take a closer look at that, where you can really start seeing this funny pattern of glistening and frequency and vibration. This has to be explained. And you can't just use high and low pressure systems or climate change to explain this. Something's going on out there that I have not seen before in 15 years of looking at hurricanes. Again, the hurricane was not caused by the hurricane. It was way to the south of us. and didn't do it. There's something else going on out here that could be doing that. So you'll see that glistening pattern going and the forming wave after wave of clouds coming at us. So we're going to get even closer into it here again, so you can see another really close up of the actual anomaly happening. And at some point you can even see right here in this part of the screen, you can see right here like a static point right in here where something's looking like it's actually generating what's happening at that point right up in here on the screen, where it looks very different in that one phase right here where it's happening. And here's the 9th where it turns back to a normal wind pattern afterwards. And then another little interesting anomaly happens. You know, on the 8th, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., there's this black dot that happens right here. Let's play it again. Use one area here suddenly in the middle of the day, right from 9 p.m. to 6 p.m. on the screen, suddenly blacks out. I don't know if that's an anomaly or, you know, whether something was not being shown there. Hard to say, but it's a question I have. So one way you can create frequencies in clouds is through the HARP antenna system. This is the big one in Alaska that many people know about. HARP is an ionospheric heater, and it sends these radio waves up to the ionosphere where there are ions up there that the radio waves can interact with because they're ionic, and heats them up. And this raises it higher and creates a low pressure cell down below. And then you can slowly turn it off again and create an extra low frequency below by raising it, creating a low pressure cell below and dropping it. This is the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, talking about what is HARP, high-powered, high-frequency transmitter for studying the ionosphere. Well, it's interacting with the ionosphere. Here's a Physics Today talking about HARP, the most powerful ionospheric heater on Earth. And that's the big one in Alaska. However, you know, that's old technology. That was from the 80s. And they've now figured out how to make a mini and having all sorts of different arrays. So there's many different types of ionospheric heaters. And they're all around the world, the big arrays. And there's smaller ones, but these are some of the big ones that you can see that are specifically for ionospheric heating and are declared that way as well. This is the one out in the plains in Peru. It looks very similar to the one in Alaska. Again, this is technology from the 80s. It's the old school technology. And you can see that these antenna arrays are worldwide. And they work by, you know, either directly going to the ionosphere or directing it as a mirror, tracking it to other points, and then reflecting it off, where you can even have various installations actually working together to take one small part of the ionosphere and heat it up. And what's interesting here is, you know, with the advent of the smaller mobile arrays, ionospheric heaters will no longer be limited to the polar regions like Alaska. A new technique called ionospheric current drive allow HARP-like heaters along the equator to create ELF waves, extra low frequency waves. So this is off the patent that the ionospheric heating system is based on, and that's all based on Tesla technology. He had it long ago. We have our own device, many people call the HARP dome. Nobody knows exactly what's inside of that big monster ball on top of this huge thing, but this is it coming into the Honolulu harbor. And this is an ionospheric heater. It's one of the newer technologies. It's smaller than an array. It has huge capacitor banks to hold charge and huge generators to create electricity in the megawatt range. Where was this? Was this involved? We don't know. Here it is going across, coming into Seattle. So this cruises around the various parts of the Pacific Ocean. So do we have the technology in order to create wave patterns in the clouds? Yes, we do. Were we using it that day? I don't know. But this needs to be an investigation because this is a smoking gun of what we see right there. So was the Lahaina fire windstorm engineered or natural? You decide. I presented the information that we have thus far. And with that, Paul, I turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Bruce. Again, very informative. And again, as we keep on getting more and more data, we'll be sharing it. And let's continue then the information in terms of some of the specific strangeness that we've seen for this fire. So one of the main things that we noticed was that on the day of the 8th, there wasn't just the fire here in Lahaina. There was a fire here in Kula that happened, also in Kihei, in Kahalui. There were also fires reported in several other locations. There were 46 incident reports on the 8th. So we're in the process of investigating all of them, and we'll be gathering more data and sharing it with you all as we do of the different fires that happened on that day. And as we go, let's start looking at the very beginning, though, of the fire that happened early in the morning. There was a fire that happened at 6:30, and again, you can see here the sparks that helped generate that. And from there, there was someone locally who saw the fire. He called the fire department and tried to put out the brush fire himself, but the brush fire was actually extinguished later that morning. By 10 a.m., it was considered to be done and clear. However, that 6:35 then ended, but then at 2:55 in the same area, the brush took off again. There's a unique aspect of the soil here in Hawaii, where the lava rock allows a lot of porosity for the roots to go down deep, and therefore they can reignite, even as long as a month after, some of the firemen have been telling me. So again, we don't know if it was a restart or if it was a new fire that started, but the one at 2:55, that's the devastating fire. And you can see here how it started up in this area, in a very short time, it swept all the way down Lahaina, all the way to Front Street. And it was an incredible inferno. There was a lot of also infrastructure failures at the beginning of the fire. There was no cell phone service prior to the fire. For some, they reported at least 10 hours before the fire started, there was no cell phone service. Also, by 3 a.m. in some areas, not all areas in Lahaina, there was no electricity. And then also there was cell phone calls that people could make out of state, but not locally, which was very strange. And also there was lack of water, especially when the firemen tried to get the different hydrants to function. There was just trickle in some, and then there was absolutely no water in some of the other fire hydrants. So again, that was another issue. One of the biggest things that happened is that the alarms didn't go off. We have one of the most sophisticated alarm warning systems in the United States, 80 different alarm systems here in Maui alone, and yet they were all silent during this catastrophe. Another great concern also is how the fire was, the people who were trying to exit, what happened to them. A lot of people were blocked from exiting the Lahaina area and also directed down into Front Street, where the inferno was going on full blast. And you can see these are some of the redirected cars. However, people who went around the barriers, police barriers, and then they were able to safely get out. So again, it makes it very strange that they were actually circled back into the fire. This is a picture taken by Spider, someone who was actually with a hose trying to save some of the buildings. He was in the middle of the fire in Lahaina, and it just came like a roaring thunder through that whole area. And you can see the level of intensity is difficult to put into words, but you can kind of get a sense here from some of these photographs. And it swept very quickly. Again, it just took a few hours to go all the way down to Front Street. And by 5:30, 5 o'clock, people were jumping in the water to save themselves. So it was incredible in terms of how quickly the fire engulfed that whole area. And now if you look at some of the fire damage from this is the whole area that was done here. So we had some 2,200 structures that were burnt. And yet out of that, you can see there are these green areas of buildings that weren't destroyed, that were still intact. And it's very strange to have such an intense brush fire come down at that level of intensity and still keep these buildings intact. And you can see that this is our first anomaly then that we'll be discussing. And it's again, how can such destruction happen all around and yet this building be perfectly fine? Or these buildings around here, even the shrubs itself, are untouched, but yet this whole building reduced to ashes. And same here, look at this. How can this happen? Where again, such an intense wind-driven fire, and yet everything around it is turned to ash, but yet here we have these buildings are intact. Then a second anomaly has to do with the cars melting in strange ways. I mean, look at this in terms of how this back of this car is burnt. The tires aren't burnt, but just the very back of it. And then it sweeps along here. And this is steel and glass that melted here. So again, and you can see that even the power lines, though, are intact, the transformer's intact, and yet this building is totally destroyed. And there's a tree standing right here. Very strange. And then if we look at this, this is a picture I took, and again, look at how the whole front of the cab is totally destroyed, the steel and all. And yet the back of the cab is fine. And you can see here, these cans, these aerosol cans, were still in perfectly fine, and the gas tank was not touched in the back. And if you look around, this Quonset hut was untouched. This house is fine. And look at this. Even this light brush that's right here hanging on the fence is not burnt. The asphalt here under the tires and everything are not burnt. So again, very strange. How could this happen? It leaves questions. The third anomaly, look at the trees all around still standing. Now, how can this possibly happen? Because again, if you have this type of intensity of fire and you have the fuel force of the actual trees itself not burning, it leaves questions. But even stranger is that you see leaves still on the trees itself. And yet this is reduced to white ash, which requires a tremendous amount of heat to get to that level of white ash. Now, again, if we start to look at the trees, let's look at another anomaly, that these trees also burnt from within. Now, how can a tree do that when perfectly standing with the leaves all intact? But if we look at the base of it, again, you see here, it's been burnt up. This was cut. We came several days after when we took this photograph, and they had been starting to clear some of the brush. So this was put in front of this, but it cavitates up from this. And here's another example here, a picture that Bruce took. And if you see how it's burnt within, and yet this bark is in perfectly fine shape. Now, let's take a closer look at this one. Bruce, you want to comment on this one here?
Yeah, that tree you can see is that part was totally burnt on the inside, but the bark on the outside is still in perfectly fine shape. You know, normally, if you put a tree limb in a convection oven, the bark and the outside is going to burn first and the inside. But if you put a tree in a microwave oven, it'll burn from the inside out. So that's a question we have. How does this anomaly happen?
And then we go to our next anomaly. Now, how can a vehicle that is sitting out there with really nothing around it to create fuel to burn the fire, how could it go to a point where we have 2,200 degrees required to melt steel? And yet that's exactly what happened here. You'll see a lot of aluminum like this on some of these. Aluminum melts at about 1,200 degrees. And these fires often are about 1,500 degrees. So again, it leaves the question, how can the steel melt like this at 2,200 degrees, and yet where's the fuel source for that? Again, another question, even more confounding, is This is glass that's been melted, and that takes 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit to melt. But yet, this was in the middle of a driveway. I took this picture, and you can see the shrubs perfectly fine in shape. Leaves are there intact. This house next to it seems like it hadn't been touched. And yet, here this vehicle sits right in the middle of the driveway. Again, the pavement has not been burnt. The asphalt was not melted, but yet this is what happened to this car. Again, it does leave questions. Let's look at another anomaly. Boats offshore. They were destroyed and in such a way that some of them were fairly far offshore here, as you can see. And if this is 220 yards away, yes, there was a lot of debris flying around. Certainly, there's a lot of embers, but to have this level of destruction happen to these vessels that were in the harbor or offshore, again, raises a lot of questions. Now, this person, Christian, who was right next to the harbor, heard one explosion after the next. He said it was like the 4th of July, where all the different boats in the harbor were going off at approximately the same time. So again, these boats that have been burnt, again, leave questions that need to be answered. And let's look at the incineration to white ash. Again, it takes a tremendous amount of heat. Usually in fires, even in large fires, that you'll have embers of logs or wooden or even a lot of different steel and stuff still intact. And so it won't leave this level of white ash everywhere, as you see here. It leaves a lot of questions. And some of this, as you can see here, we have all of this totally to white ash. Now, the reason why I put this here is because this is a blue building. And yet, even the blue building went down in white ash. And that leaves a question that some blue objects were left, and again, we don't know. This could be heavily fire retardant umbrellas. We're not sure. But again, it does leave questions because there were several blue objects that were left fine but everything else destroyed around it. And also the same with plastic. As you can see, this plastic shed here and this little thing has not been touched, and yet right next to it, totally destroyed. So again, it leaves questions, especially when we see things like this plastic piggy bank here taken out of the ashes. It does leave questions as to then why plastic would still remain in the fire. So again, these are some of the questions that we have, some of these strange anomalies that have occurred. So when we pile that on to what happened with the wind generation, which was integral to this whole fire, as well then as these types of things that we've seen, it leaves questions. And so that's why we're digging and looking. There's certainly been a lot of speculation as to what the cause is of all of this. So let's go into some of the proposed causes. Now, we'll be going into a lot more detail into our second report, which we'll be putting out in about a month from now, because we're still doing a lot of investigation as to what these are. But in terms of global warming, we have information on our website about the actual temperatures that occurred here in Maui. Bruce, do you have that slide that you want to share?
So the idea that the causes global warming, if we look at what are the warmest years, you see the average up here is the most important for each year. You can see in 1859, 74, 71, 83, you can see we had pretty much the same temperatures. And as we go into current years, we still have about the same. But what's important is we look at by decade, look at the average here in the center, and you can see our average temperature each decade is basically the same. 80 degrees drops to 79, goes up to 81, drops back to 79, goes to 81. It's around that 80 degree, 81 degree range. So are we having experiences of global warming in Hawaii? No, we're not. We've been very constant. So we can't use that concept.
So that's pretty definitive. Also, one of the other causes, Bruce, was Hurricane Dora. And as you showed on your screen share, it was just a little less than 500 miles away from Maui when the winds were strong. You want to put that up?
So another cause of the hurricanes proposed is Hurricane Dora, but it was literally traveling 500 miles to the south of us. So it was a very tightly contained unit all by itself, a very small hurricane, very tight, and had normal cloud patterns just surrounding it until you get to the anomaly to the north.
And
So as
it's
far as winds from that hurricane, that was not a cause for our winds here. It was a completely different event.
yeah. And the way that small hurricanes usually work is that they project winds about 50 miles out from the epicenter itself. And this was some 500 miles away. So again, that debunks that whole thing of Dora really being a cause of the high winds.
So what I'm going to show here is some possible arson ignition points that we have found and recorded with the fire as far as the brush part of the fire goes. And here you can see there were 3 probable areas of ignition on the south point, which I'm going to show you what we found there, which is, fairly conclusive. There's another point on Lahaina Luna in the middle, which was started, and then there's another ignition point to the north, which is a little more nebulous and hard to tell. So I'm going to show this point right here on the far right side of the screen where you can see, the winds 99% of the time travel from the south to the north across this area from Laniapoko. And this point right here is on the bypass just on the north side of Laniapoko. And there's a point right there where you can see where it was the upwind part where it started at a point source and then spread and then opened up into the big fire. So when you're looking for arson points, this is something you look for. And this is it on the east side of the island. And that point right there is just in the brush. And I'm going to show you a little video that we took right here alongside of the highway where you can see that point right there in the dry brush, further than you can flick a cigarette. You'd have to get out of your car and start it. This is Laniapoko to the right, no fires up there. It starts there, it travels downwind along that little ridge line. It then expands and goes uphill toward the Laniapoko area. And then it continues on its merry way toward Lahaina. And many people think it jumped the highway, but I'm going to show you that there was a separate fire on the other side of the highway as well from this ignition point. So the other side of the highway, on the west side of the highway, you see another point right there where right alongside the highway it starts, it goes downwind from there and it crosses over. So I have a little video about this one where you can see this part of the brush right here. And again, this is a few weeks after the fire when they finally opened it back up to traffic. So things had cleared, but there's no fires upwind from that. And from this point right alongside the highway, it burns. It then travels through the brush down the hill, being wind driven, as that's the direction the wind drives. It goes along that valley, takes out the fence line, and goes on its merry way toward Lahaina. And you can see how that is the point source upwind portion where all that started. And across the street right here, you can see ignition point right there across the street as well, those 2 points. And then there's another point here in Lahaina Luna area, which started, and it was just below a solar farm. And there's high power transmission lines there. There's probable cause that could have been ignited from something within that power lines or that solar farm. But can't really prove that. The other point is up here on the north end is where a brush fire happened somewhere along here. And there's a road all along the area that's the line. And now Google Earth doesn't do a total job of doing it, but they showed the fire here, but they didn't show this section here. But the fire actually goes along this road, drops down this road here. So there's another ignition point somewhere along that road where there is no power lines along that road. That's another possible source of arson ignition. And I saw the same thing in Kula, where again, alongside of the highway in Kula, you'll see on that way, there's no fire. This is the way the winds generally drive this way and downhill. And you can see this area here burning and it going and then opening up and taking out that forest area downwind from the trade normal winds. You can see the spot right here alongside the highway where that point right there started it. It went down alongside that way by the fence line. It also went across the fence into this little area of some dead trees and then continued the combustion downwind. So that's 3 very likely arson points where the fire happened. And just a general point to know, this is in the Olinda area, the fire that happened. This is the pine forest. And you can see it, fire took out the underbrush, but it didn't actually burn the trees or harm the trees. It was just a flash fire of the underbrush and then went on its way. And the same thing with the eucalyptus forest. Here you see the pine forest still intact. You know, it's going to grow back again. We didn't actually lose the forest land. It just took out the underbrush, which is a good thing. And the other is the eucalyptus up in Olinda area. Again, it burnt the bases of the trees, but the rest of the trees are still intact and they're going to live. It just took out the underbrush.
Thank you, Bruce. And again, we're just gathering data and information. And again, these are potential causes. And let's continue to look at some of these potential causes. So we talked about the global warming, Hurricane Dora. Also, Bruce talked about the high winds in detail. And also there's a whole theory about Hawaiian Electric and the power transmission lines. And again, that gets to be very confusing because a lot of the power lines didn't have power going through it at the time of the fire. So again, it leaves a lot of questions in terms of what may have been the actual cause. And as we go and we look at the high dry grass, we talked about that, and you can see how that could easily catch fire, but does that have enough fuel to really sustain the intensity of fire? Especially when you look at along the brush line, that car that I showed you that's in half, melted in half, was right along that whole area. So how could dry brush create that impact? Also, there's arson, and then we can't also have to look at the possibility of directed energy weapons. There's been a lot of discussions, a lot of speculation about that. You'll see a lot of videos around satellites, even Chinese satellites, that have been the cause of this high energy weapon blast that caused the fire. But again, we look at that, we look at the data, we look at information about where the calculations were made about the satellites, and we find that to be not true. So for us, the speculation on that hasn't panned out. Also, in terms of other direct energy weapons, there are airplanes, there are large drones. But if they were flying over that smoked area, because the skies were clear except for the smoke, so boats that were out looking at it along the water's edge and out in the ocean could see fairly easily if there was something flying over that area, and there wasn't anything. But then there's another thing that has been recently developed. It was in 2021 that Lockheed Martin developed this thing called Morpheus. And Morpheus is a high energy weapon. It can be launched from a tube as it's being launched here. So it could be mounted on a truck or on the top of a building. And it flies really, really low. And it goes 90 knots, over 100 miles an hour. So it could handle the winds of the storm. And it actually gives blasts of microwaves that are 1,000 times, 1 million times as strong as the microwaves that you find in your house. So again, imagine something 1 million times stronger. And again, if you put a steel wool in your microwave at your house, it'll catch fire. So again, it just leaves questions that we have to do as we go along. So in conclusion, for our report number 1, we are, again, independent. We are not associated with any organization, no government organization, no big money interests. We are just local citizens trying to get to the truth. So we'll be sending a petition. It'll be on our website. So please check that out at mauicommunityinvestigation.com, where we demand that we have a citizens investigation that has clout. So again, if you could help us though with all of this, financial support is needed at this point in time. And please spread the word about what we're doing, the investigation that we have. We're not putting any spin on anything. We're just trying to go to the facts and lay that out for everyone to see so that you can use your own common sense and come to your own conclusions as to what happens. Because as you can see, this may have global implications as to what is happening throughout our planet right now. So check us out on a regular basis. We'll be updating our website ongoingly. Mahalo.
Thank you very much.